Most people spend their lives wondering if they mattered. Not in a dramatic way, not loudly, just quietly, in the background of ordinary days, a small, persistent question that never fully goes away. Did I do enough? Did anyone notice? When I am gone, will there be proof that I was here, and that being here meant something? Most people carry that question all the way to the end, but some people, the rare ones, the ones who love with the kind of love that thinks further than its own lifetime, find a way to answer it. For the person they love. As a final gift. From the other side of their own goodbye. Steve Harvey has stood on that Family Feud stage through thousands of episodes. He has heard answers that broke him open with laughter. He has heard answers that moved him in ways he was not expecting and could not fully explain. He has interviewed families that made him go home and hold his own people a little tighter. But on a Thursday afternoon in May 2024, in a studio in Atlanta, Georgia, a 96-year-old retired school teacher from Nashville, Tennessee, sat across from Steve Harvey and showed him something small enough to fit in a jacket pocket. A book. 70 pages. Printed at a local print shop. Bound with a blue cover that his wife had chosen herself because blue was his favorite color. A book that his wife had spent the last 8 months of her life writing. Not about herself. Not about their marriage. Not about the life they had built together. About him. Only about him. About every quiet thing he had done that he had forgotten, and every life he had changed without knowing it, and every moment across 40 years of teaching that had mattered more than he had ever been allowed to understand. She mailed 75 copies to people across the country before she died. She left one copy on her nightstand with a note on the cover. It said, "For Arthur." So he finally knows. When Arthur Coleman finished telling that story on live television, Steve Harvey stood up from his chair, set his microphone down on the seat, and walked off his own stage. This is why. Arthur James Coleman was born in 1928 in Nashville, Tennessee, the second of 4 children. His father drove a laundry truck and his mother cleaned houses 3 days a week, and on the other days kept their own house with an attention and dignity that Arthur would spend the rest of his life trying to match. They were not wealthy. They had enough, and on the days they did not quite have enough, they had each other, and his mother always said that was the better deal anyway. Arthur grew up in a household where education was treated the way some households treat religion, as the highest thing, the thing worth every sacrifice, the thing that separated what your life was from what your life could become. His father had finished 8th grade. His mother had gone through 10th. Both of them had wanted more and had not been given more. And they had channeled the whole of that wanting into their 4 children with a focused, unwavering intensity that Arthur understood before he was old enough to name it. He went to a historically black college in Nashville on a partial scholarship in 1946, working 2 jobs to cover the rest. He graduated in 1950 with a degree in history and a certainty about what he was going to do with it that had been present in him so long it felt less like a decision and more like a fact about his nature. He was going to teach. He started at a Nashville high school in 1951. He was 23 years old. He walked into his first classroom with a lesson plan he had rewritten 4 times. A tie his mother had pressed that morning, and the kind of first-day nervousness that transforms itself, in the right person, into something that looks a great deal like authority. He taught history at that school for 38 years. He was not the teacher who made it easy. He was not the teacher who lowered the bar so everyone could step over it comfortably. He was the teacher who walked into a room and looked at a group of 15-year-olds and saw not who they were but who they were going to be, and then taught directly to that version of them, the future version, and trusted them to grow into it. He stayed late. Not occasionally. Every day for 38 years, Arthur Coleman stayed late. His classroom was open after final bell for any student who needed it. No appointment required. No explanation necessary. You came, you sat down, and you got whatever you needed to get through the thing you were struggling with. He never talked about this. It was simply what he did. It was part of the job the way locking the door at the end of the day was part of the job. He retired in 1989. He did not leave because he was tired of teaching. He left because Vivian's health was beginning to require more of him, and there was no contest between the two things. He had given 38 years to those classrooms, and he had meant every day of it. But Vivian was more important. She had always been more important. He had always known it. He met Vivian Louise Andrews in 1952 at a faculty meeting. She was 24 years old, newly hired as the school librarian, and she had arrived at the meeting 7 minutes early with a notepad and 2 sharpened pencils and an expression of total focused readiness that Arthur noticed from across the room and never fully stopped thinking about. He introduced himself after the meeting. She was polite and efficient and gave him nothing extra. He came to the library 3 times that week on pretext so thin he was embarrassed by them in retrospect. She helped him find what he asked for each time and thanked him for coming with a professionalism that revealed nothing. He asked her to dinner on a Friday in October. She said yes before he finished the sentence. He fell in love with her completely, immediately, and never recovered. They were married in June 1953. They built a life in Nashville that was as deliberate and as carefully maintained as anything either of them had ever worked on. 2 children, Beverly and Robert. A house in East Nashville that Arthur bought in 1961 and kept for 63 years. A marriage that people in their community pointed to the way people point to certain buildings, as evidence that something can be built well enough to last. Robert had passed in 1998, a car accident, the grief of which had reshaped them in ways they had learned to carry without letting it flatten them. Beverly had stayed close, geographically and otherwise. She was 68 now, a retired nurse, and she had been watching her father navigate the months since Vivian's passing with the helpless love of a daughter who understands that some griefs are simply too specific to enter from the outside. Vivian had been diagnosed with a heart condition in the spring of 2023. The doctors were gentle but clear. Her heart was working harder than it could sustain indefinitely. She was 95 years old. The body had given what it had. Vivian received the diagnosis the way she received the organization of a library, with a calm inventory of what was available and a plan for how to use it best. She went home. She sat at the desk in their bedroom where she had always done her reading. She took out a legal pad. She wrote at the top of it in her careful librarian's handwriting, "What does Arthur need to know before I go?" She sat with the question for 3 days. Then she picked up the telephone. The first call was to a woman named Patricia Simmons, who had been a student in Arthur's classroom in 1967 and was now a 72-year-old pediatrician in Memphis. Vivian had tracked her down through the Alumni Association of the high school where Arthur had taught. She had been making a list of former students for 2 weeks before the diagnosis, quietly from the desk in their bedroom, while Arthur read the newspaper in the living room. She told Patricia who she was. She told her she was compiling something about Arthur's career. She asked, "Is there anything he did for you that you have never forgotten? Anything you would want him to know?" Patricia Simmons was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you about the bus fare?" Vivian opened her legal pad. "Please," she said. Patricia told her that in the fall semester of 1967, her family had gone through a financial crisis that no one at school knew about. She had been unable to afford the bus fare to school for 3 months. She had been walking 4 miles each way, leaving before dawn to arrive on time, and was exhausted in a way that was beginning to affect her work. She had not told anyone because she was 17 years old and too proud and too frightened. One morning Arthur had stopped her in the hallway and said very quietly that he had noticed she was always the first student to arrive. He said he assumed she must live far away. He said he had a bus pass he wasn't using, and would she mind taking it because it was going to waste otherwise. It was not going to waste. He had purchased it the day before. He had never mentioned it again. He had never made her feel anything other than the recipient of a small logistical convenience. By the time Patricia understood what had actually happened, Arthur had retired and she had no way to reach him. "I became a doctor," Patricia told Vivian, "partly because of how he treated me that year. Not just the bus pass, the way he saw me, the way he talked to me like I was already the person I was going to become." She paused. "Please tell him. I have wanted to tell him for 50 years. Vivian wrote it down on the legal pad. Then she made another call. Over the next 8 months, while managing her heart condition, while her good days shortened and her difficult days lengthened. While Arthur made her tea in the mornings and thought she was resting, and she was sitting at her desk making telephone calls, Vivian contacted 61 former students, colleagues, neighbors, and community members. She interviewed every one of them. She asked the same question each time. "Is there anything Arthur did for you that he never knew mattered? Anything you have carried that you would want him to understand?" 61 people answered. Every single one had a story. There was the student Arthur had tutored every day after school for 2 full years in the early 1970s, a boy with a severe reading difficulty who no one else had time for, who went on to become a high school principal in Georgia. There was the young teacher Arthur had mentored in his first year, who had been ready to quit in October, and whom Arthur had walked back from the edge of leaving with a single conversation in the parking lot that the young man had never forgotten. There was the family from across the street whose youngest son Arthur had quietly driven to a hospital appointment every Tuesday for a year when the boy was sick and the family had no car, a fact the mother had never had the chance to properly thank him for. There were 61 stories, and in every one of them, Arthur Coleman had done the thing quietly, without announcement, without waiting to be thanked. The way you do something when the doing of it is simply its own sufficient reason. Vivian typed up the stories on her computer. Beverly helped her, and Beverly, sworn to complete silence, sat across from her mother at the desk in the bedroom and typed the words of 61 people who loved her father and had never been able to say so directly, and held herself together by the thinnest margin. Vivian called it a good man, the life of Arthur James Coleman as remembered by the people he never forgot to see. 70 pages, blue cover. His name in gold letters. She had 75 copies printed at a shop 2 miles from their house while Arthur was at his Tuesday morning coffee with friends. Beverly drove her. She addressed the envelopes by hand. She mailed 74 copies to the people who had given her their stories. She kept 1 copy. She placed it on her nightstand. She wrote a note on the cover in her careful handwriting for Arthur. So he finally knows. She passed away in January 2024. She was 95 years old. She died in the bedroom of the East Nashville house, with Arthur holding her hand and the winter morning coming through the curtains, and the book on the nightstand 2 feet away where she had placed it. Arthur did not notice it for 2 weeks. He was not in a state for noticing things. The letters began arriving in February. Handwritten letters, typed letters, cards with photographs tucked inside. From Memphis and Atlanta and Cincinnati, and 3 from out of state. People he had not spoken to in 30 years, writing to him out of what seemed to be nowhere. All saying versions of the same thing, that they had received something from Vivian, that they had read it, and that they needed him to know. Arthur stood at the mailbox in February in his bathrobe with a letter from a woman in Memphis in his hand and understood none of it. He carried it inside. He set it on the kitchen table. He looked at it for a long time. Then Beverly came over that Sunday and found him sitting at the table with a growing stack of letters he did not know how to explain. And Beverly went to the bedroom. And she came back with the copy from the nightstand. And she set it in front of her father without a word. Arthur picked it up. He read the note on the cover. He opened it. He sat at the kitchen table in East Nashville and read 70 pages that his wife had written about him from the testimonies of 61 people, and Beverly sat across from him the whole time and did not say one word, and when he finished, he closed the cover and put both hands flat on top of it and sat very still for a very long time. "She knew," he said finally. Beverly did not trust her voice. "She knew I didn't know," Arthur said. "She was afraid I would go not knowing. So she went and collected the proof." Beverly reached across the table and put her hand over both of his. They sat like that for a while. It was Beverly who submitted the Family Feud application. She had done it in March, 6 weeks after the Sunday with the letters. Because she was watching her father the way she had watched patients in her 40 years of nursing, with the particular attention of someone who knows how to read what a person does not say. And what Arthur Coleman was not saying was that the grief was large, and the house was quiet, and the kitchen table where he had eaten breakfast with Vivian for 63 years held a weight that was becoming difficult to sit with alone. She needed to give him something forward-facing. Something that would put him in a car going somewhere, with people around him who loved him, doing something neither of them had ever done before. She told him about Family Feud over a Sunday dinner in March. Arthur looked at her over his sweet tea. "The game show," he said. "Yes, Daddy, with the surveys. That's the one. I have watched that program," he said carefully, "for a very long time. I know. Every evening at 6:30. I know." He picked up his fork. "All right," he said. "Who else is coming?" The team was 4, Arthur, Beverly. Beverly's son Marcus, who was 42 and taught urban studies at a Nashville university and had inherited Arthur's way of making people feel genuinely seen, and Marcus's daughter Zoe, who was 24 and worked in publishing in Atlanta and had been the one in the family who understood immediately when Beverly first told her exactly what Vivian had done and exactly how large it was. The drive to Atlanta was 4 hours with a rest stop in Chattanooga. Arthur sat in the back with Zoe. He told her about his first year of teaching in 1951, about the lesson plan he had rewritten 4 times, about the tie his mother had pressed, about walking into that classroom and finding, to his surprise, that the nervousness had become something useful the moment he started talking about history. Zoe listened to all of it with the specific attention of a young woman who works with words and understands their weight. She asked questions that pulled out details Arthur had not thought about in years. By the time they reached the Georgia border, she had filled 3 pages of the small notebook she carried everywhere. She looked at her great-grandfather in the afternoon light through the car window and thought about 75 blue books going into mailboxes all over the country. About a woman at a desk making telephone calls. About the careful handwriting on a note that said, "So he finally knows." She held it the way Vivian had apparently expected the people who loved Arthur to hold it. Quietly, with the full weight of it, and without making it his burden to carry for anyone else. The studio in Atlanta was warm and efficiently run, and the production team received Arthur with a care that went well beyond standard courtesy. Someone had clearly communicated the relevant information because the attention was specific. The chair in the green room was exactly right. The temperature was managed. Steve Harvey's producer came in personally, shook Arthur's hand with both hands, and told him the show was glad he was there. "I have watched your program every evening for a long time," Arthur said. "Well, sir, today you're on the other side of it. Vivian would have loved that," Arthur said simply. "She always said it was good television." The opposing family, the Washington family from Macon, Georgia, a large and enthusiastic group with a teenage grandson who had clearly been practicing, were quick on the buzzer and strong in the opening rounds. They built an early lead that made Beverly's hands go cold. But Marcus steadied the team in the second round with 2 measured, accurate answers that pulled them back into range. Zoe was fast in the 3rd round. She had spent the drive from Nashville mentally categorizing common survey responses the way a person who works with language naturally would. and she got two number-one answers in rapid succession that pushed the Gibson family ahead for the first time. And Arthur, 96 years old. Navy suit. The same suit he had worn to Robert's funeral in 1998, the best one he owned, which Vivian had always said made him look exactly like the man she had married. He stood at the podium in the fourth round with both hands on the edge of it, and the particular quality of complete stillness that a man develops when he has spent 38 years standing in front of rooms full of people who were deciding whether or not to trust him. Steve Harvey approached him slowly. The way you approach something you want to get right. He looked at Arthur for a genuine moment. "Sir," he said. "Young man," Arthur said. The audience gave the warm laugh of people who have seen this exact dynamic before and will never stop finding it satisfying. 96 years, Steve said. "And you came on Family Feud." "My daughter arranged it," Arthur said. "I said yes because I have learned that when Beverly has an idea, the path of least resistance is usually the correct one." Beverly laughed from the side of the stage. The audience loved it. Steve smiled. "How are you doing, sir?" Really, Arthur considered the question. "I am doing," he said, "like a man who has lost the most important person in his life and is learning to live in the space that left behind." He was quiet for a moment. "Some days are better than others. Today is a good day." Steve nodded. He did not rush past it. "Vivian," he said. He had seen the pre-interview notes. 71 years, Arthur said. She was a librarian. She loved books the way other people love. He stopped and almost smiled the way I love teaching, like it was not a job but an identity, a way of being in the world. She sounds remarkable. She was the most organized person I have ever known, Arthur said. She could find any book in any library in under 2 minutes. She knew where everything was. Everything in its proper place. He paused. It turned out she organized other things too. Things I did not know about until after she was gone. Steve caught something in that. He was good at his job. He heard the specific weight in it. "What do you mean?" he said carefully. Arthur looked at him. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his navy jacket. He removed a small blue book. The book was small enough to fit in one hand. Blue cover. Gold letters. Arthur held it flat on his palm and looked at it for a moment before he looked back up at Steve. In February, Arthur said, "I began receiving letters from people I had not heard from in 30 years. Former students, a colleague I had worked with in the 1970s, a woman from across the street whose son I used to drive to doctor's appointments." He paused. They were all writing to tell me the same thing, that they had received something from Vivian. Something she had sent them. Steve was completely still. I did not know what they were referring to. Arthur continued. I had not seen anything she had sent. I called Beverly. Beverly went to our bedroom and came back with this. He held up the small blue book. "My wife spent the last 8 months of her life," Arthur said, in the steady, unhurried voice of a man who has made peace with the size of what he is saying, calling people. Former students, colleagues, neighbors, people from the community. 61 people in total. She asked each one of them the same question. He stopped for a moment. She asked, "Is there anything Arthur did for you that he never knew mattered? Anything you would want him to know?" The studio was silent in the way that very large spaces are occasionally and briefly silent completely, as though the air itself has stopped moving. 61 people answered her, Arthur said. Every one of them had a story. Things I had done, small things I had long forgotten that had changed the direction of people's lives. His voice remained steady, but it was carrying something beneath the steadiness now, the way a river is carrying things beneath the surface that you cannot see from the bank. A bus pass I bought for a student who was walking 4 miles to school in 1967. She became a doctor. A conversation in a parking lot with a young teacher who was about to quit. He stayed and taught for 31 years. A ride to the hospital every Tuesday for a year for a sick child. The mother never had the chance to thank me properly. He looked down at the book. Vivian collected all of it, he said. She typed it up. She had it printed. She mailed 74 copies to the people who gave her the stories. She kept one copy on her nightstand. He turned the book over in his hands. She wrote a note on the cover. It said, he stopped, just briefly. Just for a moment. It said, for Arthur. So he finally knows. Steve Harvey stood up. Not dramatically, not quickly. He simply stood up. He set the microphone down on the seat of his chair with the precise care of a man who knows if he holds it any longer he will not be able to continue the business of holding it. He turned and walked to the side of the stage. He stood with his back to the audience and both hands pressed over his face. The studio was absolutely silent. Then Zoe, at the end of the contestant line, made a sound that was not quite a word, the involuntary sound of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has just felt the last of her capacity to hold it give way. Beverly turned toward her granddaughter, and then they were holding each other, and Marcus had his hand over his mouth. And 400 people in the audience were sitting completely still in the way that people sit when they understand they are inside a moment that will not come again. Steve stood at the side of the stage for what felt like a long time. When he turned back around, he did not attempt to manage what was on his face. His eyes were wet, and his jaw was set in the way of a man who is determined to finish the sentence but is not entirely sure what the sentence is. He walked back to the center of the stage. He looked at the microphone on the chair. He picked it up. He stood in front of Arthur Coleman, 96 years old, in a navy suit, holding a small blue book his wife had made for him. And for a moment, he simply looked at him. She was afraid, Arthur said, before Steve could find words. That is the thing I keep coming back to. She was 94 years old, and she was sick, and she was looking at the end of her life, and the thing she was afraid of, the thing that made her pick up the telephone and start calling people, was that I did not know. His voice broke, just once. A single clean break, the sound of something precise and controlled finding its limit. She was afraid I would go to the end of my life not knowing if it had meant anything, that I would carry that question all the way through and never get an answer. He pressed his hand against the cover of the book. She went and got me the answer, he said, from 61 people. In the last 8 months she had. She spent her remaining time making sure I would know. He stopped. That was Vivian. She could not organize her own death. She could not put that in its proper place and resolve it neatly. But she could organize this. She could make sure this one thing was handled. That I would not have to wonder. Steve Harvey looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the audience. Then he looked at the floor. Then he looked back up and said, in a voice that was quieter than anyone had heard from him in recent memory, Mr. Coleman, that woman used the last strength she had to answer the question that most of us take to the grave. Arthur nodded once. Slowly, the way you nod when someone has said something that is simply and completely accurate. She did, he said. She looked at you, Steve said, working it out as he spoke, and she understood something about you that maybe even you didn't fully understand. That you needed to know. Not for vanity. Not for credit, but because a person who gives the way you gave quietly, without keeping score, never gets to see the full size of what they gave. It just disappears into other people's lives and the giver walks around not knowing. Steve shook his head. She decided that was not acceptable, so she fixed it. Beverly had walked forward from the side of the stage. She stood next to her father now, her hand on his shoulder. Zoe followed. Then Marcus. They stood around Arthur in the way that families stand around the oldest person in their center. Not to hold him up, because he did not need holding up, but simply to be close. To be there. Because some moments require the whole of a family to be present for them. Steve looked at them. "Can I ask you something?" he said to Arthur. "Of course." When you read it, when you sat at the kitchen table and read what she had put together, what did you feel? Arthur thought about it carefully. He gave it real time. I felt, he said slowly, that I had been wrong about the size of my own life. He held the book in both hands. A man teaches for 38 years. He does what he can. He stays late. He pays a bus fare when a student needs one. He talks to a young teacher in a parking lot. And then the day passes, and the next day comes, and it all blurs together into just the work. Just the ordinary work of showing up. He looked down at the book. I thought it had been ordinary. I thought most of it had just gone by, done its small purposes and passed. He looked up. Vivian knew otherwise. She went and proved it. She handed me 70 pages of evidence that the ordinary was not ordinary at all. He paused. She gave me my life back. Not the life I have left, the life I already lived. She gave me back the meaning of it. His voice was quiet and clear and completely certain. That was the last thing she did for me. She made sure I would know that I was worth the time I had taken up. Steve Harvey walked to the side of the stage again. This time, he did not turn away. He stood at the edge of the stage facing the audience with both hands pressed together in front of his mouth, the gesture of a man containing something, and he breathed. Visibly, deliberately, then he turned around. I have to be honest with this audience, he said. I am not okay right now. The audience gave the gentle laugh of 400 people who are also not okay. I am not okay because, he stopped, because what that woman did is the most generous thing I have heard in my professional life. He looked at Arthur. She looked at a man who gave quietly for 38 years and never asked to be seen. And she decided she was going to make sure he was seen. After she was gone, she organized it. She filed it properly and she sent it out into the world on a schedule she would not be there to witness. He shook his head. Vivian Coleman loved her husband the way a librarian loves a book. She knew its full value. She made sure it was properly cataloged, and she made sure it got into the hands of people who needed it. Beverly laughed through her tears at that. It was the most accurate and the most Vivian thing anyone had said. The executive producer came forward. The $20,000 prize was confirmed, and Family Feud was making an additional contribution, $20,000 in Vivian Coleman's name to the history department of the Nashville school where Arthur had taught for 38 years. To fund an annual scholarship for a student who demonstrated what their nomination called consistent, quiet service to others. They named it the Vivian Coleman Award. Arthur received this information with a stillness that was not absence of feeling. It was the stillness of feeling that has gone deeper than expression can reach. He opened the book to the first page. He showed it to Steve without a word. On the first page, in Vivian's handwriting, was a single line. He never needed me to tell him. But I needed him to know. Steve Harvey read it. He read it again. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he looked at Arthur Coleman, 96 years old, in a navy suit, holding a blue book that was a love letter written in the voices of 61 people, and he said the only thing left to say. She knew you completely, Steve said. Completely, and she made sure you would too. Arthur nodded. She was a librarian, he said simply. She never let anything important go uncatalogued. The episode aired on a Thursday evening in June. By Friday morning, the clip of Arthur holding the small blue book and saying she went and collected the proof had been viewed 9 million times. By Sunday, it had passed 20 million. It moved with the particular quiet speed of things that are simply true, not because they are sensational, but because they answer something that people had been carrying without knowing they were carrying it. The comment that appeared beneath every version of the clip, shared and reshared in dozens of languages within the first week, had been written by someone who identified herself only as a retired teacher in Ohio. I have taught for 30 years. I lie awake sometimes wondering if any of it mattered. I just watched a 96-year-old man find out that all of it mattered. I am going to stop lying awake. It was shared 8 million times. Letters arrived at the Family Feud production offices for 3 weeks after the episode aired. Not emails, actual letters. Handwritten, from teachers across the country. From a woman in Texas who had taught elementary school for 41 years and watched the clip 4 times. From a man in Oregon who had coached high school basketball for 28 years and said he had never seen anyone put into words the thing he had spent his career wondering about. From a retired nurse in Alabama who said she had spent the night after watching the episode writing letters to every patient family she could still find contact information for. Not to receive anything back, just to tell them what she hoped they knew. The principal of Arthur's former school in Nashville organized a reunion in September. She invited every living alum she could locate who had been taught by Arthur Coleman. 46 people came. They ranged in age from their late 50s to their early 80s. They sat in the gymnasium of the school where Arthur had taught, and they told stories, out loud to the room. To Arthur himself, who sat in a chair in the center of all of it. The way the stories in Vivian's book had been told privately into a telephone. Arthur sat in that gymnasium for 3 hours. He did not say much. He listened. He nodded occasionally. Once or twice, he laughed. The full surprised laugh of a man being reminded of something he had genuinely forgotten. At the end, the principal asked if he wanted to say anything. Arthur stood up slowly. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the room full of people who had been 15-year-olds in his classroom and were now in their 60s and 70s, and who had driven from Georgia and Tennessee and Kentucky to be in a gymnasium on a Saturday afternoon. Vivian was right, he said. I didn't know. He stopped. He looked at them. I am glad she told you to tell me, he said. But I want to say something to you that she could not put in her book, because she did not know it yet when she was writing it. He paused. You showing up here today, that is the continuation of the thing. She started it, and you are continuing it. She collected the proof, and you are adding to it. He looked around the room. That is what she would have called good circulation, when a book keeps moving. The room laughed and then applauded, and then several people were no longer bothering to manage whether they were crying. Zoe's short film about Vivian was accepted to 2 film festivals in the fall. The film was 17 minutes long. It opened with Arthur at the kitchen table in Nashville, the blue book in front of him, the February morning light coming through the window. It ended with him on the front porch of the East Nashville house, the same porch where he and Vivian had sat every evening for 63 years, watching the Nashville dusk come down over the street. He was alone on the porch in the final frame. But he was not, the film made clear, alone in the way he had feared he might be. He was alone the way a person is alone who carries the proof of a full life, not emptied by absence, but filled by it. Every chair at every table he had stayed late at. Every bus pass. Every parking lot conversation. Every Tuesday drive to a hospital appointment. He knew now. All of it. Vivian had made sure. Steve Harvey mentioned Arthur and Vivian on his radio program 3 weeks after the episode aired. He was not planning to bring them up. He was in the middle of discussing something else entirely, and he stopped himself. I keep thinking about something, he said. About the question that woman asked. 61 people. Is there anything he did that he never knew mattered? He was quiet for a moment. That question keeps me up at night. Because we are all walking around doing things, small things, quiet things, and we do not know. We do not know if it landed. We do not know if the person whose day we changed even remembers us. He paused. Most of us never find out. We just have to trust that some of it mattered and keep going. He stopped again. But Vivian Coleman decided her husband was not going to have to just trust. She decided he was going to know. His voice was rough at the edges. She made 61 phone calls from a desk in her bedroom while he was in the next room. She was 94 years old, and her heart was failing, and she spent her remaining energy making sure Arthur Coleman would never have to wonder about his own life. He exhaled slowly. That is the most extravagant act of love I have ever heard of. Not because it cost money, because it cost time. Her remaining time. And she spent it on him. Arthur went back to the school one more time before winter. He sat in his old classroom. The current history teacher had been gracious about it, had stepped out and let him have the room for 20 minutes. He sat at the desk where he had sat for 38 years, and he looked at the rows of empty chairs. He sat there for a while. Then he opened the blue book. He read a few pages, not from the beginning, just pages in the middle, the way you read a book you have already read and are returning to for the specific passage you need. He read about the bus pass, about the parking lot conversation, about the Tuesday drives, about a dozen other small things that had become 61 stories in Vivian's careful handwriting. He closed the book. He placed his hand flat on the blue cover. There is a question most people carry all the way to the end. Did I matter? Was I here in a way that will outlast me? Did anyone notice the quiet work, the staying late, the small gestures made without keeping score? Most people carry it all the way. Arthur Coleman got his answer. Because Vivian had always known that questions that important deserved to be properly filed, properly cataloged, properly placed in the hands of the person who needed them most. That was who she was. From the first day she had walked into a faculty meeting with 2 sharpened pencils and a notepad to the last 8 months she spent at a desk in their bedroom making telephone calls. She was a librarian. She never let anything important go uncatalogued. And Arthur, at 96 years old, in a Navy suit, on a game show stage in Atlanta, finally understood the full size of everything she had always seen in him. So he finally knows.